And there were other people in that group that were also tracking their meditations using Muse Monitor. And so I found I was opened up into this world of people who were doing meditations, having these different types of jhana state experiences, and graphing them and talking about what those graphs looked like. And I just was like, well, to be honest, it was a little bit like Alice falling down a rabbit hole. I mean,
Hey everybody, welcome to Tech for Psych, where we combine the latest in neurotechnology with ancient wisdom to supercharge your brain. Today we're sitting down with my good friend Holly Copeland, who's a wildlife biologist and has taken this last year to really dive down deep into taking a look at Muse meditation sessions and interpreting them with groups. She's really taken the lead by collecting data, publishing articles, and hosting groups of people interested in recording their meditation sessions, posting that data online, and facilitating group discussions about what those brainwaves mean. So I hope you enjoy my sit-down talk with Holly Copeland. Hey, it's Dr. Cody Rawle with Tech for Psych. I've got Holly Copeland with me today. Holly, thanks so much for joining.
absolutely happy to be here.
So Holly, we bonded over our love for the Muse Headband, data collection. And I think that one other thing that we actually have in common is our scientific background and training. And I wanted to start off in talking with you about that. And from what I gather, you're a wildlife biologist, correct?
Yep. My specialty is actually in spatial analysis and geography, and I've applied that to studying wildlife.
And I just love that you do come from a data background like that and have that interest in collecting numbers and what that means for, I mean, a complex system as much as mule deer migration, for instance, right?
Yep. Yep. I study mule deer and elk and moose. And before then I studied other wildlife. Sage grouse was one of the things I published a number of papers on.
And I know you're still working in that field, but you know, I wanted to talk about that transition and what your thoughts were about going from a field like that into what you've done such a great job with, which is exploring meditation with EEG devices like the Muse, and really engaging in online Facebook communities where people are posting their data and interpreting those brainwaves. What was that transition like for you?
So I've sort of done them in parallel, right?
Mm-hmm.
As I've gone along, I have applied I've always been a biohacker, I guess. I'm
Mm-hmm.
a closet biohacker, not so closet anymore, I guess. But, you know, just fascinated with collecting data on myself to learn and grow and for personal growth reasons. And I guess it was natural for me. If the question is what it was like, it was just something I do naturally. Is look for data and patterns.
Yeah. What are your thoughts of like these complex data sets, right? Because there's so much going on in migration patterns, I can imagine. And there's only so many data points that you can get. I almost see like a similarity between the brain and that. There's just way more data than we could actually even hope to collect. So we just have like these little data points in time. What have you seen in the Muse Facebook community about like how people are trying to interpret things, and what cues go off in your mind as like a data collection biologist, and like how accurate this might be, if there's trends?
Yeah, I mean, you know, so the first thing that most people do when they come to the Muse community is they say like, look at my graph and what does it mean?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And, right.
Mm-hmm.
That's the question I asked too when I first came on. And the truth is that no one can tell you what it means. I mean, you can look at it and you can see some initial things. But where you really start to understand and make it useful is looking at trends. Mm-hmm. And looking over the long period of time, because there's enough noise in this data and there's enough individual variation in this data that a single graph, just like with other types of data, doesn't tell you a whole lot. It tells you a little, but not a whole lot. And so that was the first thing I really learned and started to understand, was that if I wanted to understand myself and what the data meant, then I had to, you know, track it over time and watch the patterns and learn to understand what the patterns meant.
Yeah, and we're talking about Muse Monitor, which is sort of become the favorite for people using a Muse Facebook community. There's other software like the Muse Headband regular app, and then Muse Monitor is the one that really graphs these different frequencies out to where you can see them. James Clutterbuck designed it. And, I thought it was interesting seeing how people gravitated towards that app. What was your experience in coming into the community? Were they already using that graph when you came in, or how did that happen?
So they were already using that graph, and actually you were the person who told me about Muse Monitor when we first started working together. And so I didn't know about it. I was just using the regular Muse, and it's a great starting point. It's a wonderful tool, but to really start to do any personal exploration and understanding of what's going on in meditation, you really need the Muse Monitor, James's app, in order to do that. So once I started doing that, I really, to be honest, I kind of quickly abandoned the basic Muse software and just started using that app.
Well, the problem with the basic Muse software is, I understand that Muse needs to keep their proprietary information so that they feel like, or, have their app that's guiding people through meditation. But when you look at the metrics that are given, the calm, active, neutral, it's hard to really go too far with that. Basically what you're saying is, hey, your attention got distracted and now you're redirecting your attention back, and that's getting to calm, which can be useful. And I think is good for starting out. And there's definitely trends that I've seen in terms of bandwidth, is what I call it, for people doing the regular Muse meditation app. It's like the people that know how to calibrate or are very skillful in changing their brainwave amplitudes can really narrow the bandwidth of that graph that comes out. It really kind of just squashes everything down. And it's when they're getting all the birds and everything. But as far as, complex meditative strategies, explaining the subjective experience of going through that, and what these different brainwave frequencies might mean after they're graphed out, after they've been broken down by, the mathematical formulas, the Muse Monitor seems to be more fruitful for conversation. And I think that, is that what you experienced as well with those two different programs?
Yes, absolutely. So, just like you said, you can do some things with that initial Muse software, and as a starting point, it's a great starting point. But it just, you can't really, there's really not much more to learn about it, about yourself from that. I mean, the benefit of the Muse Monitor, the Muse app, is that you get the real-time feedback. So when you're a starting meditator and you're trying to learn to quiet your mind, it's really useful to have that feedback about what a quiet mind feels like. So, no question, it serves a really important purpose in that. But the work that I started doing, so after I did the initial work with you, and I was like, okay, now I understand how to meditate. I've got the basics. And then, I think what really led me into it was trying to understand jhana states and what does it mean to be in meditative bliss? Like, what is that? And what does that feel like? And you'd done some great, videos and discussion about that. And I read about it. I was, was trying to understand it for myself. And I was feeling energy coming through, and I didn't really know what that was. And I wanted to know what it would look like on the graph. And, you need Muse Monitor to do that. And at about that time, I actually, I was starting a new meditation class with a group called Raising Our Vibration, led by Stephen Shyam and Kevin Schoeninger. And so I started doing more involved, deeper meditations, and there were other people in that group that were also tracking their meditations using Muse Monitor. And so I found I was opened up into this world of people who were doing meditations, having these different types of jhana state experiences, and graphing them and talking about what those graphs looked like. And I just was like, well, to be honest, it was a little bit like Alice falling down a rabbit hole. I mean, I just wandered into this bright, shiny new world of all these crazy people doing all these, really interesting things, trying to understand consciousness and different altered states of consciousness and what those felt like. And the Muse Monitor was our platform for conversation. That was how we would, that was where the dialogue was.
Yeah, and I know I've seen this, and we talked about this a little bit before, but some of these experienced meditators can really change their graph so drastically with those programs is that it comes into question what exactly they're doing. Like, are they cheating or something? But I don't know how much we want to touch base on that, but I am now seeing so much variation in clients, not only in looking at Muse Monitor graphs, but also in MindLift, which we could talk a little bit about before. It's like everybody's got their own strategy almost of changing their brainwaves. And I think that these more experienced meditators that have been meditating for 20, 25, 30 years, they've really just learned how to change their brainwaves so drastically. And it's so cool to see them be able to interact with these programs. Is that what you experienced with the Muse Monitor and the training program as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was seeing that too. So they, and you're right, there was some question about it, but I got to know them in particular very well. And as I was experiencing this, I just, I guess I came to trust and believe that they were just really adept meditators, and that they could, produce these high gamma states, for example, these flow states, what is basically, a bliss state, a meditative joy state. And in sort of watching what they were doing and seeing, how you could, for example, I'll give you an example, they were saying, if you produced a deep love state, gamma would rise, delta would rise. You'd get this swelling of delta. And, and so I, basically went after that. I was like, oh, I want to see what this is about. And so I would work on, what essentially is heart coherence, really breathing into your chest, having a steady rhythm, and then feelings of awe, love, and would produce, like, oh, sure enough, delta rises. And when you learn to do that, now you can, you can replicate that state. And so you're tying a felt experience with a brainwave state. And that is the essence to me of what is so powerful about this kind of exploration, because it makes it very real, and it, takes it out of a concept in a book into something, because you understand it, you can reproduce it. It's very real. So it was just super exciting to start to do that. They were the ones that were really teaching me about how to do that.
Well, what I think is so cool about the community right now that we're a part of is people are so well read, in my opinion, and are reading these different books, the research that's been done, and what, for instance, like the gamma wave bursts you can find in Altered Traits, which is a book based off of a lot of research that's been done, including using functional MRI scans, EEG on Buddhist monks, etc., that type of thing. And then what's so cool is this vocabulary is developing, and you mentioned a lot of the vocabulary that's been developing on Muse Facebook group, as well as the group that you founded, Heart Mind Alchemy Project, in your article that was published on Medium that I really enjoyed, what I learned from tracking my brainwaves for 6 months. And some of those terms I just wanted to, mention, I don't want to steal your fire, but I'll just read them off here. It's like big gamma rises, theta dominating over delta, and alpha umbrella. I think that the community is still trying to figure out maybe what these terms mean, but like we're seeing data and we're trying to describe it before it can really be like captured necessarily. And because meditation is such a subjective experience. And as you said, the data is very individualized. So how do we start developing this vocabulary to communicate to each other? What is a subjective experience? What are you seeing on programs like Muse Monitor, and how can we learn from each other? what was your experience in writing that article and kind of like summarizing what you had seen in these groups and what you had learned over the course of the 6 months or so?
Yeah. Oh, well, my experience is it was a lot of fun to kind of put it together in that way and take what was a conversation that happened over the last, year pretty much, and articulate some of the themes that were emerging from that. And like one that you mentioned, theta over delta was something that was one of the first observations I made for myself, was that when I started meditating, I would often have a dominant delta. And as I became a better meditator, delta started dropping and theta started rising. And we were having these conversations about that in our group. And it's like, this meditation feels deeper, and look, theta's rising. And, other people would, you would see that in other people's graphs as well. And so that was just fertile ground for a wonderful conversation about what does that mean?
And I think that intellectual exercise is, I can't imagine a different time in history where those conversations were happening as much between people online. Before the EEG was limited to the research lab, and it was just a handful of people that maybe were, engaging and interpreting these different things. And then we didn't even have the scientific studies back then to back up trends that are seen in meditators. So what's been your experience in like these groups and these fractions that have broken off, and, the interaction between different people?
Yeah. I mean, I think your observations, this is an amazing time to be alive, right? Because we're at the confluence of Facebook community. So internet all over the world. And these devices that cost $150, which is completely democratized,
Right.
brainwave data acquisition. So this has never happened before. Like, we're making this up. And look, all these people are monitoring their brainwaves and having a conversation about it. Like, that can't have ever happened before. So how fun is that? We're all consciousness adventurers and explorers together, and it's totally democratized. This data, and this, I just think it's incredibly exciting. And that was the Heart Mind Alchemy project, which was a small group of us who were doing this pretty consistently and regularly, wanting to get together in just a smaller forum to have a conversation and explore these ideas more richly and dive in more richly and, share some articles together. So I think you're right. It's groundbreaking. It's a ton of fun, and we're all just exploring and learning together.
Yeah. And you mentioned maybe just a smaller group, and you mentioned before people that come on these groups, their default thing is to post their brainwaves and say, what's wrong with me? Or, tell me what's going on here, type of thing. And I think it's important for people to engage in that. Again, I don't think there's ever been a time where people can have their first interaction with neuroscience, EEG brainwaves, for instance, and be able to post it and ask the people in the group what they think, which I think is fine. But what would your advice be to someone like first coming into one of these groups? Because the tendency is to think that first graph reading is going to give them all the information. What would your advice be for someone engaging in this?
And Heart Mind, the one we started, is open to anybody. So anybody's welcome to look us up and, request to be in. It's not exclusive at all. But I think my advice is, people are very gentle and kind and forgiving. And if somebody does that, nobody's going to harp on them. It's totally fine. But I think sitting back and watching what people are doing is always a great practice, to just kind of observe for a little bit and see how it's going. For a few weeks. And then, watch your own graphs. Just start watching your own graphs. Don't just post one, but, watch them for, I do 2 graphs a day, watch them for a week or 2 and see what you notice. And then, and then come to the group and say, I noticed this, does this fit with what what others in the community have seen? Something like that. Coming from a little bit of your own observation.
And I think like the opposite of that, right, would be someone who comes in that thinks they know everything, that is like, this is the way it's supposed to be, and this is how it's supposed to be done. I don't think I've seen too many of those over the course of the last 2 years or so that this has been going on. But, you know, I hope I don't sound like I've got it all figured out on YouTube. I offer my interpretations and, you know, try to review the devices and explore things as I go. Have you seen any of that or have anything to add there? I think for the most part, people, like you said, people are pretty open to interpretation and exploration, but
yeah, I haven't seen too much of that, you know, sort of know-it-all-ish kind of behavior. And I too, like you, I mean, I feel like I'm just learning all the time, and I feel like I hardly know anything, to be honest.
Well, I mean, but coming from a data background, it's like, yeah, it's nice to have data and to interpret, but this isn't exactly a randomized controlled trial or anything like that, you know?
Right. So. No, it's not. Yeah. You know, it would be great if we could get a whole group of people to participate in a study. And I know Stephen has been one of the people behind pushing that idea. Like, can we start something that's a little more rigorous here with this group? And we actually have a side research group that we're trying to start something that would be a little more, you know, mass experiment type project. So,
well, I think that's where a lot of this research starts, right? It's like individual people engaging in experimentation, seeing trends over time and being like kind of identifying those trends and then trying to prove those trends through data. So more rigorous stuff down the line.
Yeah, exactly. We're seeing patterns. That's what you do as a scientist. You look for patterns, you just watch and then try to turn that into a rigorous study.
I would imagine like maybe like parsing out different types of meditation, like focused meditation versus compassion meditation, and seeing if people really could like replicate different brainwaves there. I don't know if you had any ideas coming from like a research background, how that might actually be able to be set up.
Yeah, I mean, I think you definitely need to define, you know, if you were doing a study, what type of meditation you were doing, because there's no question that different types of meditation, you know, vipassana versus an energy raising, you know, breathing up through your spine, those are two really different patterns. So it would be important to separate that out for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, just a lot of different vocabulary that's developing. And one thing that you mentioned before was the alpha bridge. Would you be able to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So one thing I noticed in my own meditations and some other meditations from people in our group was this high line of alpha on the Muse monitor graphs, which I think corresponds pretty nicely to what Dr. Jim Hart was saying in the interview you did with him about this alpha bridge. And I think, you know, it seems to be a trait effect. Some people have it, or you can build it and develop it. And so what I noticed in my trend graphs, when I did those trend graphs that I shared on that Medium article, was, you know, that my alpha increased pretty significantly over the year. And I actually did a QEEG recently, and my alpha was pretty high on that 19 channel EEG. So that was great, really interesting to see. And so it's just, you know, it's just an observation. I think some people have it. I think it can be gained. And it, you know, it's just one of the things that you can notice from the data.
Yeah. The alpha usually is one of the higher amplitudes in people. It was like the first brainwave that was discovered because of its high amplitude. But I know when I did my MindLift training, my 3-month training, I did a QEEG as well, and had SMR trained over time. They showed me that the alpha increased over time. So that was interesting. And I totally hear you where Jim Hart really advocates the alpha increase, which it's almost like a quantitative alpha increase because they can hear the sound actually as alpha goes up. So we'll have to see what comes with their wearable that they're putting out as well. But it is interesting that you're seeing those trends on the Muse monitor graphs as well.
Yeah. And it corresponds also. One of the first books I read, Jim Fermi's book, The Open Focus Brain, was another one that just really got me super interested about alpha and the power of, building a clear, calm mind and its association with alpha. So, I had read about it. I had started to do practices that would increase alpha, and then lo and behold, kind of saw my alpha increasing on those Muse monitor graphs, and other people have it. It's, really interesting to see.
Yeah, the vocabulary of these different brainwaves and what people are experiencing from, increasing the amplitude of each of the different ones is such an intellectual exercise. I know when you were talking about theta earlier, you were talking about being deeper into the meditation, and made me think of, because, theta is that transition between deep sleep and wakefulness where you're kind of loopy almost. And people talk about like flow state and intuition coming from theta as well. So it does seem to be one of those slower brainwaves that sort of opens your creativity up in a way, but also kind of like a deep grounding brainwave as well. So many different thoughts go through my brain when I hear about people talking about these different brainwaves.
Yeah, definitely. And like I started to notice when I was in a theta state that I would start to remember my dreams from the night before. They would just start to enter my consciousness, which was, super interesting. And actually reminds me of something else that was an interesting observation that I've noticed recently and had conversations with about people in our group. So Dr. Hart had talked about gamma riding on delta, and delta being a carrier wave for gamma. And I started to notice these deep meditations where I would be really, really absorbed. I would get into very deep absorption spots. And delta would start to go down over time. Gamma would start to rise. And it would be like, I called them mirror graphs. It would be like there was a mirror between gamma and delta, like they were switching places. And you could almost draw a line through the middle, and they reflected, and there was a reflection line across them. I'd be happy to share an example of one like that. I have many.
One of my favorite books that I read when I was starting off in all this was Jurge Bushaki's Rhythms of the Brain. He's a New York University neuroscientist that works with magnetic encephalography, among other super high-end brain imaging and brain tracking devices. And he talks about oscillation patterns. So it's not that these frequencies are separated. It's like what you're talking about. There's a bridge. And if you think of the circuitry of the brain, gamma can be going on all over the place. There can be little gamma processes going on in the frontal lobe that has to do with analytical processes, little gamma processes in the hippocampus that's bringing up memory. But linked between all those different areas of the brain, there are coherence patterns that are communicating the information from one side of the brain to the other, and those tend to be slower in the form of delta and theta. So thinking about like the overall picture of the brain and what might be happening is the delta might be recruiting all these different gamma bursts that are going on in different areas of the brain and creating coherence, which really creates these deep meditative experiences. And you have to wonder if that's what we're seeing on something so simple as the Muse monitor graph. It's like, oh, gamma's spiking and delta's kind of going up with it. And then boom, there goes gamma and delta goes back down because now the whole brain's sinking in gamma. There's so much interpretation there that it's so interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Stephen and I talked recently about a graph where there was a mirror effect in the beginning where, just like you're saying, it's like gamma's going up, delta's going down. As there's a deep absorption, this bliss state is arising. And then he cultivates like a dual awareness, and then gamma and delta all of a sudden start to sync instead, and they're going together. And, in the same meditation, both things are happening. So, as you point out, I mean, we have so much to understand about coherence and how things are working across the brain and what's going on.
One of the videos I'm going to be putting out soon is on MindLift, which I know you're familiar with as well. And what I've noticed from doing group calls is now I've got like 10 different people at the same time using MindLift, which is great because I can see how everybody's strategies are different for actually eliciting the positive feedback, because, it's like 3 different parameters at the same time. You're either supposed to, increase alpha, but then also decrease theta and high beta at the same time. And some people will have their own strategies in which they're getting positive feedback by just dive bombing theta, and alpha is kind of like just creeping along, or they'll increase alpha and theta will just creep along. It's like, and it's consistent between the different training sessions. So, it's not just some kind of abnormality in one session, like a drop signal or like or poor data. So you see these trends between how people are sort of, I want to say gaming the system, but it's not really, it's not like they're cheating. They're just using their cognitive strategies to get positive feedback from the neurofeedback program. And, that's not straight up meditation, but what I try to teach people is how to meditate and then bring those meditative experiences to influence the neurofeedback program. So even on that, I'm just seeing, different strategies. And it's kind of nice in Mind Lift because it's a little bit more constrained. So it's like, you're supposed to do this specific thing and you can see the different strategies. Here is like with the Muse monitor graph, it's much more sort of open-ended. So it's almost like the Wild West. Everybody's got their own their own techniques and trying to describe what they're doing and interpreting the graphs from that.
Right. But it's, the essence of it is, it's all this at the end of the day, it's about having a felt state that is incredibly difficult to describe. Like having a conversation about what bliss felt like to you or me. It's really hard to describe.
Yeah.
But if we have a shared language through these graphs, then it gives us the language to have the conversation. And just like your group example, like one person can say, oh, but I did this, and another person can say I did this, but you have this common thing that you're talking about that can unify, the conversation and help you all to go further in that conversation than if you had no devices and no, you didn't have Muse or Mind Lift. It facilitates an incredible conversation.
Yeah. And I think you make a great point, ground it in the subjective experience, which in the end is one of the most important parts. But yeah, there are trends coming out. I didn't want to make it sound like the graphs are all over the place and we don't know anything about what we're doing. There's definitely some trends that are emerging and some data points that you can use from research that's been done with meditation or neuroscience to help inform people what's going on.
Right.
So,
this actually gets back to something else that we talked about in the conversation. You asked me what a new person, should do. And there's another really important part I should have mentioned, which is it's very common for people to put a graph up and say, what does this mean? And the first thing that we always ask is, what did it feel like? What was your experience? People are very, they forget that the most important thing is to describe in detail what they felt. Then we can help, say how that's connected to the graph. So the more information, have a journal, write down what you felt at different points in the graph, in the meditation, and then share that, and then share the graph. It's always first and foremost about your experience and then the graph.
Yeah. And I think one of the most challenging things for people just starting out too, in listening to us talk or seeing these graphs, as well as like if they haven't had a profound state change meditation before, experienced jhana or meditative absorption, I don't want to make it sound like anybody that has experienced it is better in any way than anybody that hasn't. But at the same time, that like subjective experience of having like a really powerful state change during meditation, I think can be really important in the development of understanding what we're trying to do with this technology. And where, groups like your Facebook community are headed in terms of trying to better describe and, dare I say, even standardize a path so that people can be more successful with meditation and be able to experience this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. there's no question that if you want to get deeper in meditation, it's really good practice to have a teacher, to, go through some, work with somebody who's can train you and can help you with specific aspects of meditation. But yeah, I've maybe been meditating for, seriously for year and a half, something like that. And I'm working with people who've been meditating their whole life pretty much. So, I feel really, feel pretty innocent, naive, and a newcomer, but you can still make, observations. It's all personal. So, wherever you are on the spectrum, if you just started out this month and this is your first time really meditating, well, that's great. Then calming your mind is that's huge. Yeah, you can fall down the rabbit hole, and there's, a lot of people who are doing, some really amazing things with altered consciousness, but that doesn't make any less significant or important. Just the basic practice of learning to calm your mind. It's huge. And everybody in our community is, will be, behind those people 110% for coming and working on those basic skills. So we all are where absolutely. We are.
Well, I know you are curating the group and moving forward. Is there anything else on the radar that you'd like to talk about? What's going on with the Facebook groups or with your training?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So like I said, we have a research group on the side that we're investigating some possibilities for future research. And then I'm excited to build my own business working with people to do this kind of exploration. So if people want to go to my website and check out what I do, be excited to connect with them. And then I also wanted to mention that I did develop an R script to take Muse monitor data files and create trend graphs. And that's available on GitHub. And I realized I need to put a link from my website to that GitHub. So I'll do that today.
And we'll put the link below the video too.
Yeah. So you have to be a little bit of an R nerd to do that. And I've had some people who weren't, but I actually have had some people who were not and who learned R just so that they could process their Muse monitor scripts. So it's not insurmountable if somebody wants to do that. And then that gives you access to, MATLAB is actually expensive, whereas R is for free. So if you're inspired, it can be done.
Great. Well, I appreciate you coming on and us having this nice little conversation about Muse Facebook groups and what you've learned over the last couple of years.
Well, thanks a lot, Cody. And thanks for all you've done. You've inspired me so much in this last year, and working with you was fantastic. And I learned so much from you. So thank you for the work you do.
Thanks. My pleasure.